be out at 10, and then the daughter who is not here chimes in with, I have a crisis, and everything goes to shit.
Yep.
Yeah, I know.
Yes. Well, just to clarify, I had a birthday this week.
You did have a birthday. Happy birthday.
Yeah.
July 1st.
And my colleagues decorated my office, so it's actually happier than it should be for what's going on in the world. But
I don't know. That doesn't look pretty happy. You have black balloons there.
those are
Like
blue,
that-
my friend.
That looks sort of.
They actually very thoughtfully made the balloons the colors of the New York Mets, my favorite team. So that was supposed to be blue and orange.
I see. Yeah, they look black from my perspective, but okay, fine. Blue and orange, right? Okay.
Trust me, they're blue.
You're a glutton for punishment. You are an immigration.
I'm an immigration lawyer and a Mets fan. There is something common there.
Okay, whatever. Your thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are recording. I actually do have questions to ask you. I'm going to do a short intro, some of which I might cut, but we'll see. But you ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Excellent. Much has been said about this massive 900-page budget bill that squeaked out of the Senate Tuesday morning after an all-night filibuster and is now working its way through the House for a July 4th signing by the guy who's the president. Yes, we know Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski voted for it because she was able to make deals to exempt her constituents, but she later expressed how worried she was for people in the rest of the country who would lose their Medicaid and likely their SNAP benefits. No better way to celebrate America's birthday than with the sentiment, hey, I got mine, but sorry for you. Then there was the story about a small town in western Nebraska, the group Common Ground, which I can't tell, maybe a documentary about soil erosion, or maybe a group of farm women talking about sustainability, or maybe a political nonprofit, which I think would be a good thing. They held this town hall in the town of Scotts Bluff about the cuts the budget bill would bring. And even town administrators had to Google the information because no one had ever told them that they obviously don't use news outlets that have written or broadcast about it. So one would think that if many of your school kids were suddenly not going to have breakfast or lunch, if your hospitals in your area are going to have to shut down, someone in the right-wing ecosystem would have at least maybe warned them. All of this because money is being taken away from poor people, and it's going to billionaires. But you know who else it's going to? It's going to ICE. Get this. The entire ICE budget is currently $3.4 billion. And they've overspent their budget already because they send these masked people all over the place. This bill is giving them $45 billion just for detention facilities and another $22 billion for transportation and hiring. If this bill passes, wrote Aaron Reichlin Melnick, I'm not sure I said his name right, on social media, it could make ICE the nation's largest jailer, with more funding for detention than the entire Federal Bureau of Prisons. It would give ICE enough money to have more officers on board than the entire FBI. This alone could transform American society forever. Hang on a second, Mike. I have to deal with that phone.
No problem.
Yeah, just hang up.
I'm trying.
Okay, thank you. Okay. UNLV Immigration Clinic Director Michael Kagan published Melnick's quote on his Substack, which was called The End of the Beginning, in which he argues essentially that, oh, yeah, we ain't seen nothing yet. So I invited him to come with me, and he's sitting right here next to me on screen, although we're in two different places. Michael, welcome.
Good to be here. Bad topic, but good to see you.
It's good to see you too. So let's start with this $45 billion given to ICE. Why should I not think of this as akin to Goering and Himmler creating the Gestapo and the SS?
I'm not really going to make much effort to convince you that you shouldn't. It's the $45 billion is only for detention. That is a 13-fold increase
Mm-hmm.
in the amount of money ICE has for detention. You gave the dollars already. It's a roughly they're going to try to double the number of ICE officers and give them $20,000 signing bonuses, and the increased funding for transportation that's to actually carry out deportations, about a 19-fold increase. These are just increases. I mean, most government funding increases for a program are more incremental. I mean, this Aaron, who said this could have transformed American society, I think is right. I mean, this is creating a monster, a beast that we've not seen before, right? I mean, this is the kind of increase you look at in terms of like the scale of the army in wartime, right? So it will transform American society, and it will create a enforcement apparatus that we probably can't fathom because we're just not used to it, right? So what we have, that's why I said
we have to look up the history of Chile.
Something like
or
that.
Argentina.
I think, there's no definition of what it means to be a police state, but part of it is just the omnipresence of a repressive government force. And we don't have something quite like this especially from the federal government in the United States. So what I said on my Substack was that basically everything we've seen from ICE so far is just a pilot project. It's just experimentation of what they might do. So I think we are beginning a new phase now, and it is scary.
It is scary. We have moved into America's Holocaust. Would you disagree with that?
Look, I try not to use Holocaust analogies because it stands alone. Even among genocides, the Nazi Holocaust stands alone, maybe only the Rwandan genocide. And so I don't want to go there. But you can do plenty of bad things before you get to the Nazi Holocaust level. I think that actually one of the problems we've had in the United States is that we've actually, in some ways, we need to do a lot more Holocaust education, but we actually need to do a lot more fascist and authoritarian education. And we need to understand that the Nazis are actually only one variety of authoritarianism, and even only one variety of fascism. So we can have a very scary outcome, including with a lot of deaths and a lot of suffering, without, say, gas chambers at Auschwitz.
Yeah, Ruth Ben-Ghiat has been talking about this a lot, that this, the authoritarianism that we're seeing here has a lot more to do with authoritarianism we've seen in Latin America, like in Chile and Argentina.
Yeah, or even if you want to go to the 30s, I think you'd want to look more at Spain or Italy, right? Mussolini, and especially if Mussolini ended up being influenced a lot by Hitler, but he was a fascist, probably had more direct parallels to Trump in certain ways. There are parallels, don't get me wrong, that you can find with Hitler. Obviously they have used the poisoning the blood, right? That's straight out German Nazi, but that's not unique. The other thing I just want to note, if I really want to scare myself, is the fact that we're early. And so if you were to look, we look at the Nazis from a post-World War II, we know what they did, but it's, if you want to understand what we're living through, you have to look at what did people know in, July 1933. And if you look through that lens, you'll find probably even more parallels, which just illustrates how dangerous, because you can still follow a lot of different paths, ranges of bad.
Right.
But we can't foreclose the absolute worst.
Yeah, I am a student of the Holocaust, and some authoritarian countries. I do. When I say the Holocaust, we're moving towards the Holocaust. No, we have not built the gas chambers yet. We're just starting to build the first concentration camps.
Yeah, right.
And I'd like to get your opinion on this alligator Alcatraz concentration camp. Oh, and the T-shirts they're selling.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So yeah, I think that, look, ICE detention centers have always been horrendous, and I think one of the things that has happened, one of the reasons, that one of the things I actually had hope for from the first Trump administration that was somewhat disappointed is that the horrors that Trump makes a lot more explicit might open a lot more people's eyes to what immigration enforcement has always been like. Right. So because there is a way in which people are discovering, good people, to be clear, good people are discovering, wait, can they do that? And an immigration lawyer like me might actually say, actually, they've been doing that for a long time. And this is, and in some sense, that's not actually good, because like,
Right.
I shouldn't be shaming someone for not knowing. We need to welcome them into the tent. But we have very poor due process, and a lot of the pilot project I described has been a lot of experiments in how can we get even less process than what we already had. We already have terrible conditions in immigration detention. People who have been in state prison for serious crimes will usually say state prison is better in a bunch of ways than ICE detention. And so this is just designed to be worse. I think the other thing with the alligator part and the alligators and the snakes and the merch, I think this is actually where you get into a real this is real fascism, because it's not just it's taking pleasure in it and inviting supporters to take pleasure in it. It's pornography, right? Do you like to watch? And that is deeply unhealthy, right? So whatever one thinks about, say, criminal justice, I think generally a lot of people might agree that even a democratic free society needs to have some prisons, right? And there are people who would debate that, but I think that's nearly a consensus. That doesn't mean, though, a democratic and free society loves its prisons, or sells T-shirts about the prisons, or is happy,
or exalts in the torture that happens in the prisons.
In fact, we're scared of them, and we set up a lot of law to regulate them. A lot of our rule of law is about understanding the government is going to have these really powerful and scary possibilities and powers. We are going, including to be able to lock people up for long periods of time and take them away from their family. We need to regulate that in a democracy, not take pleasure in it. And what we see with the T-shirts and the travel mugs is like, it's an invitation to take pleasure in this. That is very dangerous, because it's so incredibly dehumanizing.
I totally agree, but this didn't happen overnight. Like, I remember September 2001, right? Sitting there watching the towers go down. Sitting to watch. I was sitting actually watching it when the second plane hit. I was asleep when the first plane hit. But I had to convince myself that this was real, that I was not watching a movie.
Yeah.
And this is from a cultural perspective, and I have been a cultural critic most of my career. This is what I have been kind of like seeing happen over the last 30 years, right? We do happy violence. And a plane going into a tower before 2001 would be perfectly fine to put into a movie, right?
Right.
And people being in concentration camps with alligators would be a great plot for a movie, right?
Yeah.
We have sent people to Hollywood who have thought increasingly about more violence porn, and that the literary community has also picked up that wouldn't happen in real life. So I feel like we've sort of anesthetized people to that, but also, social media has sped it up. We are not where Nazi Germany was in 1933. We're here in 5 months, but we're really not. It's been happening for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's just finally getting, sort of like juiced. So that sped it up a lot. And it is playing on our innate biases, our innate racism.
Yeah.
And that has been sort of like a thing here in society for a long time. So there's a part of me that's like, well, this was going to happen. And let's see what happens on the other side. I'm still fighting against it. I'm still writing about it. I'm talking to you, but there's a part of me that's just like, I don't want to see my friends die, or my family die, but I don't. We've been moving towards this space for a long time, and nobody has noticed. No, that's not true. Many people have noticed, and those of us who have spoken out and said our prison systems are broken, our immigration systems are broken, what have you, we're moving towards fascism, have been pushed aside. Nobody wants to actually believe that stuff, and people still are not believing it.
That's right. Yes, because everything's normal in your own time.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It only looks exotic from a distance.
I feel like we are Cassandras.
Yeah. And I think on immigration, I sort of feel like more people are seeing it now, right? I mean, I can see it in the polls that people are like, wait, the number of people saying, wait, I didn't vote for this. And again, a lot of us are like, there's a response that I think is kind of intellectually sound. Like, well, actually, you did. You did vote for it. And actually, one thing I'll say, Donald Trump, especially second term, mostly keeping promises. That's sort of a media trope, right? But like, there are promises you don't want people to keep, right? So like, right. When someone says I could kill you, we don't really want people to follow through on that promise. Right. So I mean, and I think we've talked before, and we could talk again about why is it people are seeing it now and they didn't see it in October, November last year, even though I don't really think actually much of this is all that surprising. But I guess for those who've been warning, those of us who've been warning how dangerous it is, I think more people are seeing it. The question is what to do, and is it too late? And I think, because I think all we can do, I was just talking to my daughter about this, to some extent, there are things I can do as a lawyer, so long as courts are relevant, and who knows how long that lasts.
Indeed.
And in some ways I'm kind of privileged that way, in that I can channel my anger and fear at work every day. Now, I know not everyone has the opportunity to do that. I think protests matter. I think speaking out matters. I think we've become too cynical about, well, what will happen from this? Even sort of the critique of what is performative, I think, has gone sort of too far, right? There's a valid critique of when people are just sort of displaying, well, Pride Month is a great example for performative, like, politics, right? Like, before, like, showing rainbows and like, there, I've done it, and like,
we invented performative.
And there is, and it's not that there's no value in it, but of course, right. The real value is, like, are you willing to sacrifice anything? And sacrifice could mean anything from, will you take a few hours out of your day to go to a protest when you could watch the game instead, right? Will you and then other things that we're seeing as being really important, would you be willing to sacrifice anything institutionally for what you said you believe?
Meaning what? Anything institutionally, like what?
Okay, let's stop talking about, let's talk about the other. I think the two main targets of this era, the most intense, have been immigrants and transgender people. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about transgender people for a minute. University of Pennsylvania the other day, right? Mm-hmm. Basically completely caved, right?
Yes, they did.
Yeah, and this makes a lot of sense, actually. Before we condemn the president and the board of trustees of the university. So you're saying all I have to do is give this other swimmer the record and say that we'll never allow a transgender person on the sports team again, right? Under any circumstance. And then you won't threaten all of the grant money we get from the federal government. And you have a whole bunch of people telling you, right, that how much good is done by that grant money, how many people are employed, how close we are to cures of key diseases, et cetera, right? And it's millions, actually, at Ivy League. Sometimes it's, as we've seen, maybe billions of dollars. Yeah. And just for a few swimmers, right? So then, it's irresistible institutionally. But if you believe that people matter, then you have to also think that people are not disposable, right? So I can negotiate, right, there's things, money is a good example usually. Like if you and I are having a financial dispute, or like the president of the university is having a dispute with the union, you can split that baby sometimes, right? You can be like, all right, what if your co-pays on your health insurance are going to be $25 instead of $30, or and so forth. We can, and everyone will feel a little frustrated, but that kind of negotiation is necessary. But it's different. Well, let's go back to the Nazis. It's different if someone says, hey, university, listen, we don't want to cut off all of your very valid research funding and lead you to lay off your whole staff. All you have to do is expel your Jewish students.
Yes.
Or let's say, you know what, I'm a reasonable anti-Semite. Here, just expel half of them. You think too many, whatever, fill in the blank. This is what's being done to transgender students right now, essentially. And you can see how, as long as it's offensive when I say Jewish, because we've learned, oh, no. But in that was a lot more acceptable, right? It was more like, yeah, the Jews, I think they're okay, but I see where people are coming from, was like a mainstream dinner party thing people would say. Right, so that's how people are about transgender people. I don't really want to hate on anyone, but it is, it's something reasonable people are debating, so it seems reasonable to throw them away. Mm-hmm. Same with immigration, because, well, reasonable people don't like illegal immigration, etc. And what about the ones who commit a crime? It's because it's within that realm of reasonable people could disagree. These people are expendable. And that is when I was talking about the difference between being performative. Oh yeah, we said we welcomed anyone until there was a cost.
Yes. For me, the line is, and I've been saying this in journalism all the time, that you do not undermine people's humanity.
Right.
To govern, you do not undermine people's humanity to do a story, right? I would not do a story on transgender people's right to exist. Right. Mm-hmm. If you are so problematic that you actually don't think transgender people exist, then that's your problem. I am not going to center myself and my journalism between a transgender person and somebody who doesn't think that they have a right to exist, or that they're making it up or whatever. I think that we have undermine people's humanity too much as a society, and certainly in my profession, that is where we have put ourselves. Yeah. So let me get back to questions that I had for you. Who should be worried? We've got a Cuban man who came to the U.S. in the early 1970s, I think. They arrested him. He was 85 years old, and he died. Is this kind of thing happening right now, where people with green cards are being detained, citizens are being detained, and why isn't it getting any more attention?
Yeah, well, I think cases like that have started to get attention and have broken through, actually. I think that's why there's been some shift in public opinion. That case is not unique. He had that gentleman had, I believe, a very old controlled substance crime. I know of cases here recently as well. I can't go into too much detail. Similarly, someone's older relative who, the family had forgotten that they had a controlled substance violation in the 80s. Immigration never forgets. And even for all the harshness of our criminal justice system, there's a bit more actually room for people to put their lives to get back together and live, really admirable lives. And often I feel like, gosh, if the worst thing you've ever done in your life is that you possessed cocaine in 1983,
right,
I'd like to emulate you, maybe. But immigration won't forgive you for that, and so that is not at all unique. And in terms, you asked though, who is in danger? And look, eventually we all are, and I do think this is or at least all of us who do not. We could rate people, right? Like, and give points to things. I hate to do this, but it's I work with in our line of work, a lot of Black humor. So we can all rate ourselves, right? So I am like, a straight white guy. So no points for risk for me, except that I'm Jewish and fairly outspoken on immigration, so I get some risk factor for that.
Mm-hmm.
If I were gay, we'd probably add another point for me. But the people at most risk now are obviously anyone with any kind of insecure immigration status. I can parse that, but I think we have to look at basically any Latino probably should be a bit nervous, right? Because they are getting increasingly targeted, right? There are more and more cases, and especially Latinos who are in close relationship with people with more insecure immigration status. And that's really relevant in Las Vegas because we're a mixed status town, right? A huge percentage of our families have multiple immigration statuses under one roof.
So what you're saying is kids who are citizens and their parents are not citizens, the kids can get deported too?
Yes. Also spouses, right? Who are married to someone who's undocumented, but also just colleagues and friends, because more and more of the ICE arrests we're seeing are guys going to work, right? And the pickup truck gets pulled over. And it's possible in that pickup truck, you've got multiple immigration statuses, but they all might fit a common ethnic stereotype. The friends, right? Because like the more you have more of these sort of raids on where just people congregate, like what's happened in Southern California, and a little bit here, basically just people who are hanging out together are especially if they're Latino, right? So like a bunch of, because then you're asking the ICE officer to tell different Mexicans apart, right? And I'm not sure I have confidence in that happening. And so that can lead to being harassed, lead to being questioned. It can lead to being arrested for several hours, and it can lead to worse than that. And just to illustrate, the risk that we're living in, the racial risk. What I have always said, look, mass deportations are always racial deportations. We've had two previously. I think we are beginning a third in American history. The previous two, they've always targeted Mexicans, the previous two in the 20th century deported as many U.S. citizens as non-U.S. citizens, and I don't expect that to be too different. So Laura,
so when were the previous two for our
previous two was the first of all Operation Wetback under Eisenhower.
Oh my God!
And that's sorry for the word. I usually give
no,
but that was what it was called. And under President Eisenhower, that's actually the one that President Trump said it's the record he wants to break. He said that repeatedly during the campaign, which is part of why, for me, like this was always clear how we would go, because he said that's his model. That's the record he wants to break. And they deported a ton of U.S. citizens. The one before that was under Hoover. Started under Hoover, especially in Southern California. They just loaded Mexican people onto trains and buses and sent them to Mexico, and they just grabbed people based on stereotypes, no due process for the most part, and they deported a lot of U.S. citizens. This one is not only targeting Mexicans, but they're certainly included. So yeah, it's
with brown skin who speak Spanish. That's who they're targeting. And then
not speaking English or speaking English with an accent are probably risk factors if you want to go back to the score sheet I was talking about.
That's frightening, because I know people who were born here who were born here, ended up moving back to Central America, and then came back, who are citizens but who do have accents, and it's really pretty crazy. There was a few months ago, I heard about somebody being picked up who works at a hotel, and one of the security guards at the hotel turned this guy in, and he was born here. He was a citizen. His mother had to go to the Henderson Detention Center with his birth certificate to get him out. How often is that happening? And how? Okay, there's so many questions in that, right? Like the security guard where he works turned him in, which is highly problematic, right? And how often is it that people actually they believe the birth certificate and they let the kid out, they let the guy out?
There are cases. This happened. I'm going to look something up for you here. When the back in the first Trump administration, where they picked up people who they had early notice were, first of all, they picked them up based on profiling. They had early notice this person was a citizen, and still the person was detained for weeks. Because they're fortunate that just bringing the birth certificate to the jail let them out. But if the jail, I don't know what happened there, but the jail easily could say, well, we just follow orders from ICE, and ICE doesn't pick up the phone. And then you have to go to get a lawyer, and it's hard to get a court date. So we don't have great mechanisms for this. And so there is was recently a government report. This is again a federal government study that from 2015 to 2020, ICE deported at least 70 U.S. citizens. That's actually going through the full deportation. For every citizen they deported, they actually arrested about 10 more. So that's,
and how is it that you can deport U.S. citizens? What did they do?
It is very important to understand when people ask, like, how could this happen? It's important to understand this at the most basic functional level, right? It goes back to what I was saying before about regulating the government. At some level, a law enforcement officer is just a man with a gun. And if there are several men with guns, and if they also have some vehicles, a jail or two, and an airplane, then they can deport you. So how do they do it? They point a gun at you, they shackle you, and they put you on a plane. That's how it's done.
So it wasn't done legally.
What you're really asking is, how could this happen legally? And it can't. Like, by definition, it cannot be legal. But we have very inadequate, even in the normal system, we have very inadequate checks to prevent those kind of errors. That is when we talk about due process, this is what we're talking about, right? It's the equivalent in medicine of the safeguards to prevent the administration of the wrong medication that can kill someone in a hospital. And they have elaborate checks that are supposed to prevent that, still not 100%. That is what due process is for regulating the powers of the government. And of course, now, though, they are working very hard to avoid even the normal due process, which had already proven not to be good enough.
I want to talk about how we underestimate what the administration is going to do, even though they tell us, right? I'm looking at Harvard, right? Harvard, the Trump administration said, we are going to not let any of your students have foreign students have visas, right? We're going to deny foreign students visas to go to Harvard. But I thought about it the other day, and I was like, maybe Harvard is just a test case. Maybe we should be looking at this from the point of view of the foreign students. Maybe what they're saying is, we are not going to let any foreign students in this country at all. And we'll see how this plays out when we attack the premier university in the country. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's spot on, because I think this is where a lot of people just had wool over their eyes about the ideology that's driving this bus. They have no use for anything non-American, with the word American having a particular nationalistic and pretty racial definition. And so they are different from a Mitt Romney Republican, if anyone can remember when that existed, with someone who would have said, like, well, I'm not really against immigrants, but I don't want it to be illegal and so forth. And there are people who I think sincerely believe that, but they are not running the government right now. And so I think a lot of people say in business, are inclined towards this. Of course, they often realize they need the labor and the skills that immigrants bring. And so, like, why would you target the most brilliant, young PhD students in the world?
Mm-hmm.
Why can't you see why they're beneficial to us, right? Any
Mm-hmm.
economist could tell you why they're beneficial to this. A historian can tell you about many examples in history where countries built themselves by attracting the best and brightest that other people discarded.
Mm-hmm.
And the Statue of Liberty, was inspiring. The whole huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Also a good business plan, right? So they and that was a secret sauce for the United States. These folks don't believe in that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So they do not care how brilliant your Bangladeshi chemist is. All they hear is Bangladeshi. Right. So I think that is very much on the agenda. I don't think it's economically disastrous.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But I think so. There are some who might say, okay, realize we actually need these workers or we'll have no food in the grocery store. Right. And others, I think the people who are driving this policy, actually, they don't care, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we can't afford to buy fresh vegetables anymore, I think they think that's a reasonable cost to keep America pure.
I don't think they even think about vegetables. Like, no, the people who are driving this haven't been to a grocery store in years. They have no idea what regular people are going through. Also, I'm going to take a little bit of issue with the Mitt Romney thing because I think what you're saying is, we had Republicans who were moderately racist. That was, that's different from these Republicans who are outwardly racist.
Sure.
I think that he was a step on the way, right? And
yeah.
Stuart Stevens, who was his campaign manager, wrote a book in which that was titled "It's All a Lie," and it was all a lie. And he specifically said it's the entire Republican agenda from the 1980s forward was about racism. Mitt Romney's the book about Mitt Romney. Romney would not go there. He would not go that far. And I think we have been moving this way the entire time.
I'm not going to bend over too far to defend him. He also was very bad on immigration, right? And he promoted in fact, that was the first time I think I ever heard the phrase self-deportation, which has now become in vogue. I think in Romney's case, it was partly because of what you said, which is that he could not, because I think he's a probably fundamentally decent person at some level, he couldn't bring himself. He would not want to go to Alligator Alcatraz. That's hard. That's impossible to imagine. Although that is like a direct result. I also want to say, again, if we want to trace origins, I mean, we can find many origins. There was the Know Nothing Party in the 1900s, but in terms of modern politics in the Republican Party, I would say the 80s and Reagan and sort of forms of polite racism that he mastered. And also we have to go back to the Southern strategy, right? Because I think there is an issue about, the Southern strategy was a conscious effort to take political advantage of some of the public's darkest impulses.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's what this is.
And it's very clear why that opportunity was there, right? And it was because of racism and figuring out how can we, in a post-civil rights movement world, take advantage of this. But it's also a moral choice that they made. And I think there's a direct line from that to now.
Last question I want to talk about is the 14th Amendment. We just had a ruling from SCOTUS about what wasn't about the 14th Amendment. It was just
go ahead.
Right. It was allowing not allowing judges to do nationwide injunctions, which I wish we had when the Methylprestone case was happening, right?
Yes. But I could listen to
nice.
like that, right? Yeah.
But it's looking more and more like they are going to be interpreting the 14th Amendment the way Trump keeps talking about it, that it's only about children of slaves, formerly enslaved and children of slaves. And and therefore anybody who is born here, who is not a child of slaves, is not necessarily a citizen. Is my assumption correct? Do you disagree with it? What is going to happen, do you think, as we move forward with this?
So I guess on this one, I still am calling other people alarmist. So, and maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I really hope not.
Okay.
So I would not agree with everything you just said about the views of the majority of the Supreme Court on whether the 14th Amendment, specifically the birthright citizenship clause, whether that only applies to freed slaves. Would it surprise me if Justice Thomas and Alito go along with that? Not really. But I am not convinced that the majority of the court, not even a bare majority of the court, I would take it as a gut punch if it's even 5-4. I think it's 7-2, if not 9-0, will actually uphold birthright citizenship when they get to it. But
exactly. When are they going to get to it?
What?
Yeah. When are they going to get to it?
Well, it's going to come back to the Supreme Court pretty quickly, and it's actually already in the district courts well, it's been there since the beginning, and it's going to continue percolating from the district courts quite quickly up to the courts of appeals, because what's going to happen is there's going to be some procedural maneuvers to deal with this most recent decision. So they've already have sought class status. There's a lot of Civ Pro minutia that is incredibly important about what's the impact of this bar on nationwide injunctions. If class actions become the new universal injunctions, then it'll be a moot, not a zero effect, but less effect. If state attorney generals still have standing, it'll lessen the effect. But if those things, which are actually being questioned by the federal government as well, are also struck down eventually, then we're going to see a real revolution, in that it'll be very hard to use the courts as a full check on the executive branch.
Okay, so why then did they make this ruling in the 14th Amendment case? And I understand that it was Trump's attorneys who did not argue the 14th Amendment, did not argue birthright citizenship. They just argued that judge doesn't have the power to do this, right? So in states, right now, judges have the power to get rid of people who are citizens because there's no nationwide stoppage. There's nothing nationally stopping them from doing that. Am I wrong?
We have to see. Hold on. Wait, let's talk again in a few weeks, to see what happens with the class certification. The Supreme Court actually stayed its own decision for 30 days. So there's actually a little bit of time for this to play out before the nightmare scenarios about birthright citizenship would be real. So again, I'm a little less convinced on that, because the reason on birthright, let me be really clear why it is I'm still have some faith. You mentioned mifepristone, and it's a good example. Whatever else one can say about the right to privacy and the right to bodily integrity and the right to reproductive freedom, they are not explicitly in the Constitution. We have to concede that, right? That's always been the legal doctrinal problem on that and related issues. The Constitution is not actually very explicit and clear about very many things. So that's where you get into this issue about originalism and textualism, and how do we find a right that seems like should really be there, but it isn't there explicitly. The Constitution's not clear about many things, but it is clear about birthright citizenship.
Yes.
So
if you believe that the 14th Amendment is legitimate, I'm not sure many people on the Supreme Court believe that the 14th Amendment is fully legitimate.
Well, they may not have voted for it, but it is there. So I guess that's where I think that I still want to believe, and this is, remember, you're talking to a law professor.
Right.
My entire career and most of what I think about all day long depends on the idea that laws matter, right? Because this is really a situation where if birthright citizenship is struck down, I don't know what I'm doing, right? I need a different skill set.
Right.
Because all I can do here, look, this is the Immigration and Nationality Act. This is what I live by. I hate this law, but I can read it. It's written in English. I can read the words. Classes of deportable aliens, and I can read the list. My whole profession depends on the idea that the words that I would read there matter, as opposed to just If it's just I don't have any skills to offer. I don't know why we charge students tuition to learn this, because then actually I would say try to pay bribes or something, right? Because like that's the alternative.
That's what we're
Hiring a lawyer. So that's that. But I think you raised actually what I do think worries me, and I think is a huge error by the Supreme Court. There, a lot of us, myself included, think that there is actually a problem, or I should say, was a problem with universal or nationwide injunctions.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we can see they hurt both sides, right? Like there are a lot of people who should have DACA right now and don't because of a nationwide injunction. Mifepristone's a good example. We can come up with a bunch of others, whether you're progressive or conservative, there's a nationwide injunction for you to hate. So, and it is a problem. It led to a lot of foreign shopping, and there probably is a procedural issue with allowing a single judge to make such a momentous issue. However, they solved a certain problem. So what the court did, I think, now is basically create a situation where the medicine is worse than the disease was.
Yes, indeed.
And they did it too, exactly as you said. Oh, now you're worried.
Right.
So like that is the problem. And that's where I think like a lot of the more optimistic takes on Chief Justice Roberts have often proven to be very wrong. That if he was worried about the court's legitimacy, then they would have found another case to deal with this, rather than this one. This one, what it starts to look like is, okay, we can't really give Trump what he wants on birthright citizenship because the constitutional text still matters, and we can't find a way around that. But let's see what juice can we squeeze out of this lemon? Oh, universal injunctions, and I think that's what they did.
Okay, so I am definitely more pessimistic about that than you, but let's come together.
I'm not 100% confident you're wrong anymore, but let's check back.
We'll check back in a few weeks, and I appreciate you talking to me. Michael Kagan is a law professor at Boyd Law School at UNLV, and he's the head of the immigration clinic. He is in his office. I made this mistake yesterday saying, well, you're probably not checking your school email because you're on break. And he's like, I'm an immigration attorney. I'm never on break. Right. So he's in his office, and you can tell behind him that he is a man who is a glutton for punishment because, yes, that is a Mets banner behind him. So immigration lawyer, Mets fan. I'm really sorry, Michael. You've chosen a hard life.
Yes.
Thank you for being with me.
Oh, it's good to talk to you.
It's good to talk to you too. Let's plan next month to talk about this stuff. Okay, cool.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Now I am stop recording.